The debate, such as has happened between so-called science and so-called faith, has a lot of quite murky roots. In the 18th century, in my country, for instance, one person I happen to know a little bit about, Charles Darwin's grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, because I once lived in Lichfield, which is where he lived, and Lichfield in the 18th century was one of the sort of small, buzzy intellectual centres of Britain. And those guys were already exploring their scientific experiments within basically what I've called an Epicurean universe. And as I say, in Epicureanism, God and the world, or the gods and the world, are a long way apart. God is not involved in the world, if there is a God, and so we just have to explore the world as it is. That goes with the philosophy called deism, where you have an absentee landlord God. The 18th century was a way of simplifying certain questions. Right, God's out of the mix, now we can just do our experiments. But as we do our experiments, if God is out of the mix, then when we observe change going on in the world, it must be a change which has happened from within the processes of the world. When Charles Darwin went on his boat off to the Galapagos and studied these things and those things and finches and turtles and goodness knows what, that was fantastic and extraordinary and mind-blowing, but the philosophical framework within which he interpreted that was one that his grandfather had been working on 2 generations before, and so had lots of other people. The idea that God was out of the picture and what you had was evolution, development, of an explicitly godless kind, a God out of the picture kind. The problem is that in America, even more than in Britain, and it was quite true in Britain as well in the 19th century, the deism of people like Thomas Jefferson and so on had split off God from the world for political reasons. Because once God is out of the picture, then we are free to develop whatever sort of empire, whatever sort of power we want. Sadly, the church colluded with this, because the church basically treated Christianity as a sort of escape from this world off to this distant God. And you have that in spirituality, which is not anchored and earthed in social reality. And you have it in a soteriology, a theory of how you get saved, which is that you leave this world and you go off to be with that God. Neither of those is actually biblical. In the Bible, God and the world, heaven and earth, kind of mesh together, and you find Jesus in the middle of that, you find the Bible in the middle of that, and you should find yourself in the middle of that. And part of the point of being a Christian is that we are meant to be living at those strange overlap points between heaven and earth. That's what prayer is all about. That's what the sacraments are all about. That's what actually ministering to the poor in Jesus' name is all about. As Jesus himself said, if you do it to the least of these, you do it to me. There's a sense of overlap. And that actually makes life much more complicated. And it seems to me you need to unpick all of that. You need to understand how we got where we got before you even get to scopes and monkeys and, court cases and so on. Because those court cases are just misunderstood before they even start, because of all that worldview baggage that's coming to us from the 18th and 19th century. We need to relocate the question as between devout Christians here and eager scientists there. We need to relocate that question within this much larger understanding of where our culture has been, where it might now be going. Otherwise, it'll be a dialogue of the deaf, or a battle in the dark, as it were.